Hi everyone, this is Arcadius and welcome back to Naval Creed. Today we'll be going over the stats clash for the Tier 3 matchmaking battleships as well as a general review on all matchmaking Tier 3 ships at the end of the video. Before that, it is update day and there is a couple things to go over. So Oregon City, the newest American heavy cruiser, is now released. It'll take its place between Baltimore and Des Moines in the tech tree. It's pretty much just an upgraded Baltimore. There's really not that much difference at all. In fact, the only difference is rate of fire and AA damages. But besides that, I'm pretty sure it's the same. There has been some changes to Baltimore as well to adjust for Oregon City. She has a slower rate of fire. She also has lower nose armor as well. But other than that, I think all other stats should be the same. And then the Super American Dreadnought, I've renamed her Rhode Island, but her actual name in game is Maine, has now been released for rank points. I'm not sure how many, considering I haven't played or opened the game since the update went up, but I'm going to assume it's about 36 rank points, considering she's a pretty powerful ship, and she ranks up there with Coral Sea, the other, the only rank point carrier at this time, and she's pretty powerful as well. So I would assume she's about 36 rank points. The only other change is for Iowa, Missouri, and Illinois. They had their belt armor increased by about like 1 inch or so. Not by much, maybe not even that, but it's a little bit of a difference. So you might see some change in game. So we'll have to see if that decreases the amount of citadels you'll find on these ships. To be determined. Like I said, I haven't played the game, or the update, I should say, so I don't know. Today's focus, however, is on matchmaking Tier 3 battleships. And so we'll go over the Tier 3 battleships, but we will also include the Tier 2 battleships. That's because if you play a Tier 2 battleship, in my case, I can play Kawachi and Danton. I do not have Mikasa, so I can't play Mikasa. But if I play Kawachi or Danton, I'm usually tossed into a matchmaking 3.0 game. So if you play a Wyoming and you're matched against a player that is playing a Danton, it's definitely possible that you'll see these ships, and so we're going to include them in the comparisons. And those ships are going to be Mikasa, we have Kawachi, we have Wyoming, we have Danton, we have Corbei, Nassau, Dreadnought, and Invincible. Now, Invincible is another ship I do not have, similar to Mikasa. So there are some statistics that I cannot view, considering I don't have the ship. So those will just be left as a question at this time. If you do have the ship or know someone who does, you can feel free to ask them, if you're that interested in it. But we're only going to go over the stats we have, and we still have quite a few stats for the ships I don't have, so we can look at those as well. So Mikasa is actually going to be a very strong powerhouse in terms of everything except her main guns. Secondaries is pretty good, her AA is good, health is good. Well, her speed is trash too, but she's pretty decent on paper. This is one of the ships I actually regret not getting an event. I did play the event where she was released, and I kind of just skipped over her because it was going to be a lot of work to get there. And I regret it because she looks like a very fun ship. Kawachi is just a pile of trash. Uh, yeah, just it actually pains me to show the advantages of the ship, that mainly being in her high explosive salvo. But at tier 3, she actually loses that advantage and she just goes back to being a pile of trash. Wyoming is going to be overpowered as heck, and you will see why that is very clearly when we come to the point of her AA and her main guns. Corbet, actually no, Danton first. Danton is also going to be trash, nothing special about the ship, but it is a tier 2, so you can't really expect much when she's tossed into a tier 3. And then Corbet is actually also very much overpowered in terms of her guns. She actually has the best gun layout at this tier. She can use 5 turrets on the broadside, and with a little bit of wiggling, she can use 4 turrets either directly fore or directly aft, which is the best kind of layout you can get in this tier. It's not the best broadside, but it's the best mix of broadside and forward slash backwards armament. And she's a pretty fun ship. And then we have Nassau, the smallest guns on any battleship in this game, 11 inch. But she does have some advantages, but on paper she looks really bad, and we'll go over that or why that is, and then when we go over the material. And then we have Dreadnought, which is actually one of the strongest battleships at this tier, believe it or not. And then Invincible, which I have never played, but I have played against, so I can kind of get a feel for how she plays. And I can also look at her stats and make an assumption from just playing the game itself. So those are the ships that we'll be going over today. So some French, American. We have a little bit of everything. We have Japanese, we have American, we have French, German, and British. The only ones we don't have are Italian, because we don't see those until tier 6, and then Pan-Asian, because they don't really have any battleships that we're going to go over. So we have almost every single, well, there's also Russians. We don't see Russians yet. So we almost have all the countries, and we're going to start by going over general statistics. So first things first is we're going to go over health. Now, Mikasa, even as a 2.0 matchmaking battleship, has more health than all the other, well, tier 2s and the tier 3 battleships. By actually quite a bit. What was it? 3,100 health points difference between Mikasa and Wyoming. Wyoming being the other very healthy ship. You also have Corbei, which is 42.3, and Dreadnought, which is 42.6. So those are the ships with the most health. Nassau is the lowest at 35.4, and she actually has less health as a tier 3 battleship than Danton, which is a tier 2 pre-Dreadnought, which has 35.8. Not by much, only about 400 health, but it's still kind of disappointing to see that Nassau's that bad. When it comes to torpedo damage resistance, Invincible ranks at the top at 25%, so any torpedo that hits her will automatically only do maximum of 75% of its total damage. That's not including saturation or just the game itself. You never, well, unless you're shooting a ship that has 0% torpedo damage resistance, most of the time you're not going to do full damage. The worst is Corbet at 6%. This is actually a common theme. A lot of the French battleships, even at the early tiers, are going to have absolute trash torpedo damage resistance. I don't think it's going to get past 10% until like tier 7 or something like that. Regardless, it's trash, so just get used to that. Mikasa is pretty decent still at 20%. And then Wyoming and Dreadnought have 18 and 17, which is also really good, and then the rest are about mid-teens to low teens. So pretty okay there. When it comes to belt armor, Corbet actually has the most of 330 millimeters, and right now it says Wyoming has the least at 229. However, that's not including Mikasa and Invincible. I'm not including Nassau, because in game it says she only has 20 millimeters of belt armor, but I don't think that's accurate. That's also a common thing for German battleships, is that it shows a really low number for belt armor. I don't know if that's just counting the outside armor and not the turtleback design that it has or not, but regardless, I highly doubt she only has 20 millimeters of belt armor. That being said, Corbet, even though she has the most, is actually highly susceptible to Citadel hits on the broadside, while Wyoming, with comparatively the least, is actually quite resilient against Citadel hits. It's not impossible, it's just a greater chance of it happening on Corbet than Wyoming. Dreadnought is also pretty trash in taking damage. She can be Citadeled quite easily. Nassau, you can get Citadels, and it's not all that uncommon, but still, most of the time it's just chunk damage, and she doesn't survive that long when she takes a lot of chunk damage. Danton, I haven't really fired at Danton unless I'm in Danton, so I don't really have a good opinion on that. Kawachi is trash. She gets burned and destroyed by secondaries. You don't really need to shoot her at all if you don't want to. That's how bad her armor is. Mikasa, I have shot her with like other tier 2 ships, but when it comes down to tier 3, I'm not quite sure, but I do remember her armor being pretty decent. I don't think I've ever Citadel to Mikasa. And then lastly, Invincible. Again, I fired at Invincible. I don't think I've ever Citadeled her, or if I have, it's not very common. She has pretty good Citadel armor. Turning circle radius, how good are the ships at turning? Nassau, this is one of her only advantages. She turns the quickest, or the smallest radius, I should say, at 490 meters, with Invincible at 610, the longest. Now, that's a theme with British battle cruisers. Get used to them turning like a truck. They're not going to turn very well. However, British battle cruisers are actually going, or battleships, are going to turn very well. And then everything else kind of depends on the ship and the speed. So, yeah, Dreadnought has the second best at 550, and then the rest are about 580 and 590. Mikasa is also 550, so yeah, she's pretty good too. Speed, you're not going to get anywhere fast with these battleships. These are the ships that are like the Dreadnoughts, the pre-Dreadnoughts, that if you hit 22 knots, you were holding on for dear life because that was a high speed. Now, Invincible is the fastest at 25.5 knots because she is a battle cruiser. That's what she was designed for, pretty much. And I'm assuming she even has a speed boost to increase that to, I would assume, like maybe 27 knots. Um, I don't have the ship, so I can't prove that. But regardless, she's the only exception, and then everything else is about 20 to 21 knots. The only exceptions there are Danton at 19.2 and Mikasa at 18 knots. So the Dreadnought, or the pre-Dreadnoughts, I should say, are pretty slow, but everything else is not that much faster. And honestly, it doesn't really make a difference. Surface detectability, Wyoming is absolutely trash. It can be seen from the moon at 17 kilometers. And it looks like there's a few ships that have pretty good surface detectability, like Kawachi and Danton at 9.5, which are the tier 2s. There's also a tier 3 of Corbei at 9.5 as well. So even though she has really good firepower and health, she also has really good concealment too. So she can kind of be used as a sneaky, beaky battleship, but kind of not. And then air detectability, you're really not going to meet any aircraft at this tier. I've played the occasional game where I'm tossed into a tier 4 matchmaking with these ships, but it's usually when I'm in the tier 4 and every other ship is down tiered. So, again, not really going to see any aircraft, but if you do, Mikasa has the best air detectability at 7.1 kilometers, and again, Wyoming has the worst at 13.4, and the majority of them have 8.3, so somewhere in the middle. Nothing too special there. All right, going on to the guns. So Mikasa's actually every single battleship except Nassau has 12-inch guns. Nassau has 11, well, technically 11.1s, but I'm just going to say 11s. So 12 inch is a very popular caliber at this tier, and so it'll come down to damages and other stats to make them different. So Mikasa and Kawachi actually have the same exact guns. We went over that last time. The only difference is that Mikasa can pump out 8 shells in a minute, while Kawachi can pump out 16, which means 2 possible fires for Mikasa and 4 for Kawachi. And those damages are also shown in HE Alpha and AP Alpha. They're not bad shells. The high explosive is actually the best at this tier, but I feel like you shouldn't be spamming high explosive with the battleship, even if it's at this tier. Sometimes it can't be helped. There's a lot of cruisers that armor piercing just goes right through them, but Japanese battleships don't really have accuracy, so, or at least Kawachi doesn't. They're not terrible. The shell velocity is actually pretty. Well, I was actually about to say it's okay, but now I'm looking at the stats. It's actually pretty slow. Almost the slowest. So yeah, there's nothing really special about the Japanese battleships at this tier, but they're both tier 2, so it's not really surprising. Wyoming is an absolute powerhouse. She has a lot of 180-degree turret rotation a time. It'll take her over almost 43 seconds to turn from one side to the other. And that is going to impact your playstyle most of the time. I just kind of sit on one flank and shoot towards the center of the map and keep everything to one side of my ship and don't engage with the other side. Because if I do, it'll take forever and a day to actually turn my turrets towards that target. So you just pick a side and stay there. Rate of fire is 2.0, so 30-second reload. Your individual damage per shell is, well, actually kind of in the middle. And your fire chance is 22.4%. You can see all the stats here. But your armor piercing damage is the highest at this tier at 10,100 per shell. Now, mind you, Wyoming has 6 twin 12-inch guns, which isn't a lot. Well, it is, but other ships have that same layout. So Kawachi has that. Let's see what else has that. Corbei has that as well. And Nassau has something similar. She has the same kind of layout where you can have 6 twins, but she only has 11s. But the way that Wyoming has all the turrets on the center line means you can use all 6 turrets at one time. So you can shoot all 12 guns to one side, which is something no other ship at this tier can do. And that does help quite considerably. Now, she does have the drawback in that she only has 2 turrets facing directly forward or directly aft. Which, not including the pre-dreadnoughts, every other ship can actually use at least 3, I would say. Kawachi has the 4 and the 2 wing turrets. Same with Corbei. She actually has 2 4 turrets and 2 wing turrets. Nassau has the 4 and 2 sides. Dreadnought also has the same thing. And Invincible also has the same thing. So, yeah, besides Mikasa and Danton, Wyoming can only use 2 turrets directly ahead or directly astern. But she can use 6 on the broadside. And that gives us damages unlike any other ship at this tier. We have 24 shells in a minute, which is the most you can pump out. Maximum of possible 5 fires, which is really, really good. The second highest after Invincible. And then high explosive alpha 68.4. And then an armor piercing alpha of 121,200. We don't see a number this high until like tier 5 or 6, honestly. So she really stands out in the armor piercing department. And if you see a Wyoming fighting armor piercing at you, you better be scared because it will definitely hurt. So yeah, she can, in one salvo, if everything is a citadel, she can probably kill a normal battleship like 2 or 3 times over. Wyoming is very powerful. She's one of my favorite ships at this tier, and also one of the most powerful, but not the most powerful. It determines on what kind of playstyle you're looking for. And we'll go into that in a moment. Danton, same kind of thing we went over last time. Nothing too special. Pretty fast shells. Not the fastest, but still pretty fast. But with only 2 twin 12-inch, you're not going to do enough to really make a difference. Most of the time, I just use her main guns and her secondaries as high explosive spammers and have the fires do the damage, because that's the best way to use this ship. Corbet is actually a really, really good ship in terms of her gun layout, as we already mentioned. Her guns are almost exactly the same as Danton. You do have a dip in rate of fire of only 1.8 rounds a minute instead of 2.0, so that does come out to be a 33.3 second reload. But your shell velocity is 850, which is second highest, and your armor piercing shell velocity is 783, which is also pretty good. Considering you can only fire 1 maximum round per minute, considering it's 1.8, you can only send out 10 shells. But even then, that's still pretty decent amount in terms of like actual gameplay. It's not the most when compared to the other ships, but it's still pretty decent. Only 2 fires possible though, and then you can see the other stats here. Even with only 10 shells though, she still has the second highest armor piercing alpha of 86,000. A far cry from 121.2, but still a lot. Nassau, this is actually also where she redeems herself. Yes and no. She has the lowest caliber guns and the longest turret rotation at this tier of almost an entire minute. Similar with Wyoming, you pick a side and you stick that side, because if you have any other target on the other side, the game will be over by the time your turrets turn around. So it's a good thing you have wing turrets. However, she does have the fastest rate of fire of 2.7 rounds a minute, which if you get some stats and bonuses and everything's like that, you can actually get it down to about 3 rounds a minute or so. So base reload is 22.2 seconds. The lowest high explosive damage, and your armor piercing damage is also the lowest, but your velocities are the fastest at 855 for high explosive and armor piercing. And the armor you can penetrate with your high explosive shells is 70 millimeters, which is the second best after Invincible. 16 shells per minute, only 2 fires still, and really, really low values in terms of high explosive alpha and armor piercing alpha. That brings us to Dreadnought. Her guns are actually exactly the same, other than the fact that she doesn't have high explosive. All British battleships have what's called long fuse armor piercing. It's MAP is how it shows up in game, and the shells are colored blue. Pretty much they are best to use on nose-in targets. So if you have a ship coming directly at you, you're going to want to use MAP. And that'll go through the nose and do a ton of damage actually. However, that's the only way that those shells will actually do a lot of damage. If you fire on the broadside, most of the time it'll actually just shatter the shells. And in that case, you're going to want to use armor piercing. But if there is even like, if the angle of the ship is too strong and it just bounces armor piercing, you can also use long fuse armor piercing just to go through that angled armor as well. So anything that you can't normally hit or damage with armor piercing, choose MAP. And it'll do a lot of damage. Not as much as armor piercing, but it still has the same shell characteristics. For Dreadnought, I haven't really had to use MAP, mainly because the 12-inch guns are still powerful enough to overmatch, I think, every battleship at this tier, honestly. I don't think I've had a problem with it. Yes, you might still get some ricochets, but for the most part, you'll just go straight through the nose. So I just use armor piercing for the majority of the time. Really fast shells, 831 meters per second, 16 shells per minute, no fires, but pretty good armor piercing damage as well. The third highest. It's also tied with Invincible. Now, Dreadnought may have another turret than Invincible, but when it comes down to gun layout, they can still use only 4 turrets on a broadside. So the Invincible has the same kind of guns, at least in armor piercing, but for high explosive, a 47.5% chance of fire. British battlecruisers have a very high chance of lighting fires with their HE shells, and that is reflected in their percentages, and they can also pen 76 millimeters of armor. So a lot of HE spamming and damage to be done with this ship. And she can set a maximum possibility of 7 fires out of every 16 shells. So yeah, a lot of damage being done there as well. Alright, so that'll bring us to gun range, which is actually a very, very wide variation. Kawachi has the lowest range of 9.7 kilometers, and Corbei has the farthest of 17.4 kilometers. You can see how she is overpowered. That's actually a difference of 7.7 kilometers between Corbei and Kawachi, which is almost double Kawachi's range. So even at the speeds of 20 to 21 knots or so, Corbet is going to get a ton of shells and salvos out before Kawachi can even think about returning fire. So when it comes down to that, it's pretty bad. If we don't want to count the tier 2 battleship, we can just look at Nassau at 10.1, and that's still 7.3 kilometer difference. So yeah, not only does Corbet have really good broadside layout of 10 shells or 5 turrets, but she can dish them out to ranges far exceeding what any other ship can hope to return fire at. Wyoming, which is also the other powerhouse at this tier, can only shoot out to 14 kilometers, so a 3.4 kilometer difference, which is quite a difference because that's still a few shells that you can't return fire at. And then everything else is just about 12 kilometers or so, with Mikasa, Danton, and Dreadnought and Invincible being between 11.6 and 12.0. But yeah, a very wide variation between the main guns. Secondary battery, you have Corbet, Dreadnought, and Kawachi that goes out to about 4.5 kilometers. The rest, not including Mikasa, are only 4.0, and then Mikasa is a 3.0. You're not really going to get into any secondary brawls with these battleships. If I were to say the best brawler battleships are going to be Nassau and Dreadnought. Um, Dreadnought's actually the best secondary ship at this tier, in my opinion, and we'll go over the secondaries in a moment. AA stats. There's only really two ships, well, three ships at tier 3 that have good AA, and two of them are battleships. One of them is Wyoming, which has 28 AA guns and can do a maximum of 82 damage per second, or DPM, maybe it's minute. Well, at least 82 damage overall. And then Mikasa can do 62. And if you actually look at the stats here, Mikasa can shoot do the most damage at range, which is about 4.5 kilometers. But when it comes down to 3.1 or 3.0, they actually are equal at about, was that 46 DPS? And then at 1.2, Wyoming has more than Mikasa. Corbei has 26, but it only goes out to 2.0. And then the rest is pretty much inconsequential because it's not existent, pretty much. I mean, Danton and Invincible have absolutely zero AA guns at all and no damage at all. But again, you're not really going to see any aircraft, so not that much to worry about. When it comes to secondaries, Mikasa has 7 secondaries on a broadside of 6-inch caliber that fire armor piercing, and 8 secondaries on a broadside of 3-inch caliber that fire high explosive. Kawachi has 11 secondaries on a broadside of 6-inch caliber that fire high explosive. Wyoming has 10 secondaries on the broadside of 5-inch caliber that fire high explosive. She also has 1 secondary that shoots directly astern or behind her. That's not counted in the broadside, so she technically has 21 secondary guns, but she can only effectively use about 10 or so when brawling with another ship. Danton has 3 twin turrets on each side of about 9.4-inch caliber that shoot high explosive, and 8 3-inch or 75 mil caliber that fire high explosive. Corbei has 11 138s or 5.4s that fire a high explosive. The thing with these guns, though, is that the way the casemates are, you might have 11 guns on a broadside, but you can never really use all 11 guns at one time. If you're firing towards, the front left, you can use about 6 guns or so, and if you're shooting towards the back left, you can use about 5 or so. But you can't really use all 11 at once. Nassau has 6 150 mils or 5.9-inch guns on the casemates that fire armor piercing, which is really good, and 8 88s, or just over 3 inches or so of high explosive shells as well. Again, a very good brawler battleship. The armor piercing shells are going to do a lot of damage against battleships and cruisers. Dreadnought, however, kind of has confusing layout of her secondaries. Depending on which side she's shooting on, some sides can actually use more guns than the other. For example, one side can use 17 guns in terms of secondaries, and another can use 16. She has an odd number of guns, and so it determines on which side. Honestly, though, it doesn't really matter. That one extra gun is not going to do much. They're 3-inch caliber, and they fire high explosive, but they do a ton of damage. Definitely would recommend a full secondary build as much as you can for Dreadnought. It will pay off. And then Invincible has 12 4-inch guns, a mix of casemates and turret top mountings. I'm assuming they fire high explosive. Again, I don't have her. I tried to play a couple of games to see if I could go against Invincible to see if that is true, but I was having no luck. So it's entirely possible that they could shoot armor piercing, but I'm 99% sure it's going to be high explosive. Again, the best secondary ships are going to be Nassau, Dreadnought, and to an extent, Mikasa as well. I say to an extent because Mikasa's secondary range is the lowest at 3.0 kilometers, so you have to get pretty close to actually have them be useful. And sometimes you don't want to be that close to other ships. But definitely Dreadnought and Nassau. Nassau has a catch. I say that because German secondaries aim for the superstructure or the tower on the ships. So for ships like destroyers at these low tiers, they're not tall enough to be hit by German secondaries. Most of the time, they're just going to go right over the top of the ship. That doesn't happen with the battleships all that much, and cruisers, it's hit or miss, literally. Um, but I'd say it's about 50-50 if you're going to hit a cruiser or not. But for battleships, you hit almost all the time. So Nassau is a good brawler against battleships, not really against anything else. Dreadnought is a good brawler against everything. Whether it's a destroyer, cruiser, battleship, you're going to do a ton of damage. And consumables. Mikasa and Invincible are question marks because I don't have the ships. And like I said, I think Invincible might have a third consumable that I don't have here as a speed boost, but I don't know what those numbers are. And I don't even know if she has it or not. But for damage control party, Nassau and Wyoming have the longest lasting damage control party at 25 seconds, with the French battleships having the second uh, shortest. Well, not counting Kawachi, they do have the shortest at only 18 seconds. Cooldown for every single ship is 80 seconds and unlimited uses. And then for heals, most of them are 30-second long heals, except Dreadnought, which is 25 seconds. All of them except Kawachi have 80-second cooldown. Kawachi has 120 seconds, so 2 entire minutes. And then all of them except Kawachi and Dreadnought have 4 charges of heals. So not only does Kawachi take a long time to get her heal back, but she only has 3 of them. So you can see how Kawachi melts really, really quickly in games like this, because you don't normally have 2 minutes to survive if you're using a heal. Dreadnought, she's actually pretty decent. Um, I do know that British battleships, and I think British battle cruisers as well, have at least 1 charge less of heals, and that's normal. But they usually get a lot more out of the heal than normal. Um, it doesn't say how much is healed per tick, I guess you want to call it. Um, but if ships like Wyoming and Corbei and Nassau have a normal heal, it wouldn't be so far as to say that the British battleships and battlecruisers have a super heal. You can heal a lot, even if it's only for 3 charges, but you do have to use them a little bit more sparingly than normal, since you only have 3 instead of 4. And I'm pretty sure that wraps up all the stats for the Tier 3 battleships. Yep, and now we're going to go over all Tier 3 ships. So that'll include cruisers and destroyers as well. So in terms of health, Mikasa and Wyoming, Dreadnought, Corbei, they're all ranked at the top at over 40,000 health. Wix is at the bottom at having less than 10,000. And it's a nice little sandwich of battleships, cruisers, and then destroyers. So St. Louis actually has almost as much health as Nassau, believe it or not. It's only a difference of, what, 6,000 or so? Not even. Which is, what, 1 salvo. So not a lot of difference there. And then it drops off pretty quickly to Kuma and Ninghai, as you can see. But pretty straightforward. When it comes to speed, though, I was very surprised that Kuma actually goes faster than the Destroyer of Wix. Only by about 0.5 knots, but still, in a chasing fashion, if Wix was to chase Kuma, Kuma would actually win that race. She would be able to pull away. Now, you have to give benefit of the doubt. Wix does come with a speed boost that does increase your time or your speed over a certain amount of time. So she would be able to outrun Kuma at that point and catch up, but you only have so many charges of that, and it's only for a limited time before the cooldown kicks in. But on base speed, Kuma is faster, and there's only 3 ships that actually are about 30 knots or so. That's Kuma, Wix, Tenryu, and Caledon. Everything else is pretty much slower than that, though Kolberg and Invincible are kind of in the middle, 27 and 25.5. Invincible is actually faster than some cruisers of Ninghai and St. Louis. You're not going to catch her with those cruisers, but you also wouldn't really want to engage her with those cruisers because those are pretty squishy cruisers. And then all the battleships at the bottom have the slowest speeds. Corbei and Dreadnought in Wyoming are the fastest, not including Invincible though. When it comes to main battery gun range, Corbei is shooting from the other side of the map at 17.4 kilometers, and then it drops down to Wyoming at 14.0. Kuma's actually can shoot farther than a lot of other battleships, 12.3 kilometers, and then Danton is 12. Then you also have Caledon at 11.8 kilometers. And then you have the battleships of Mikasa, Dreadnought, and Invincible, and then a few cruisers, and then Nassau, Kawachi, and Wix are at the bottom. Wix actually can shoot almost out to Kawachi's main range. So a 4-inch gun almost has the same range as a 12-inch gun, only by a difference of about half a kilometer. So it's pretty trash. And literally every cruiser at this tier can outrange Nassau. So again, pretty trash. Nassau's guns are just the only benefit is rate of fire, and that's pretty much it. Honestly, there's nothing else. Well, I guess you could say high explosive piercing, armor piercing, but Invincible still outclasses you in that. So yeah, just Kuma is very surprising. I found that out. She has not only the fastest speed, but also the third farthest range. So she is definitely a powerhouse. She is also, though, at 3.5 matchmaking. So she kind of is a little bit stronger than just normal 3.0 matchmaking ship. So you won't always see Akuma, but when you do, she will be pretty strong at this tier. That brings us to High Explosive Alpha. Wyoming and Corbei are not surprisingly at the top. However, Kawachi is surprisingly at the top. It's those very damaging high explosive shells that do 7,150 damage per shell, and she has 8 of them per broadside. Yeah, that'll do a lot of damage if you get a lot to hit. But the accuracy and the range you have to be at to do that is kind of questionable. And then you have all the other battleships, and then it's nice another sandwich of battleships, cruisers, and then the destroyer at the end. Dreadnought is at the bottom because she does not have high explosive shells, and I'm not incorporating long fuse armor piercing into my comparisons here, so they'll just sit off to the side. It's very similar to just normal armor piercing, though. And going back to armor piercing, we have, again, battleships at the top, cruisers, and then destroyer at the bottom. Wyoming and Corbei, again at the top. This time, however, with Dreadnought and Invincible, and then Kawachi, with very strong armor-piercing alphas. Nassau actually, well, I say is better, or not at the bottom, but Danton and Mikasa only have 2 twin 12-inch, so having 4 11-inch twins, and still just barely able to do enough damage. Nassau's guns are very questionable, but she's still a very fun ship, but only in terms of her maneuverability and secondaries. And then you have all the other cruisers. St. Louis at 19,200, and then drops down all the way to Tenryu at 8,600. Yeah, Tenryu is just a big destroyer, and if you play her like that, you'll have a lot of fun. If you play her like a cruiser, though, you're going to struggle because you're not going to last very long. In terms of AA damages, we have Wyoming at 82 DPS or DPM, Mikasa at 62, and Ninghai at 54, and everything else is pretty much worthless. So those are the 3 top AA ships. Ninghai is a 3.5, however, so that's why she has pretty good AA, but Wyoming at a 3.0 is pretty decent for her tier, the best, in fact. And then Mikasa as a 2.0 is still pretty high up, even at a 3.0 matchmaking. Everything else is pretty much trash, though it is safe to mention that Kuma does also have okay-ish AA for her tier, but as a 3.5, that's still questionable. Wix actually is in the middle of the group. Wix will never shoot down a plane, but she still has better AA than Tenryu, Kawachi, and Dreadnought, Kolberg, Danton, and Invincible. The last 3 of those ships not having any AA whatsoever. And then we go to Torpedo Broadside. So we only have 5 ships to compare there, 1 destroyer and 4 cruisers. Wix is the most at 52,200 with the upgraded torpedoes, and then Ninghai has the lowest at 16,000, considering she only has 1 twin launcher on the side. Tenryu is not far behind Wix though at 42,600. Like I said, if you play her just like a giant destroyer, that you'll have some pretty fun games with her because you can still send torpedoes out to about 7 kilometers, I think. When it comes down to surface detectability, I don't think any of these ships can stealth fire torpedoes. No, because yeah, there's not going to be stealth firing out here. Wix is has the best surface detection at 6.6 kilometers. Wyoming having the worst at 17 kilometers. She can literally be seen before she can shoot, which is not a common feature in normally. So she shoots out to 14 kilometers. So for 3 kilometers, she can be spotted, but not shoot back. So for a ship like Corbei, which has a range of 17.4 kilometers, once you close those 400 meters, you can see the ship, you can shoot at it, and she can't, or Wyoming can't do anything for another 3 kilometers or so. But yeah, Kolberg actually has, well, actually, hold on. Yeah, Kawachi, Danton, and Corbet actually have really good concealment. This goes back to Corbet as well, though. Wyoming has 17 kilometers, but Corbet, which has longer range than Wyoming, has about half the detectability of Wyoming. So she is a very sneaky battleship. So if she fires and then gets into trouble, she can just stay quiet and her concealment will drop back down to a more reasonable number. Now, considering it's tier 3, you're pretty much close range, so you don't really have to worry about concealment, but it does help in terms of cruisers and destroyers. Caledon, mind you, has the worst detection of any cruiser at 12 kilometers, which is actually farther than her gun range. Another kind of case like this, her main gun range is only 11.8. But yeah, she can be seen before she can fire back. So pretty trash there. In terms of air detectability, no real aircraft again at this tier, but in case you do, Wix is the best at 3.0. Tenryu is not that far behind at 4.7. And then Caledon, for some reason, has 4.8. So she has really good air detectability, but really trash surface detectability. And then all the other cruisers, and then you have all the battleships, and then Wyoming can be seen from the moon at 13.4 kilometers. So Wyoming's not going to go anywhere quickly, and she can be seen from everywhere, but she has the strongest broadside at this tier. So it's you can see the beast coming at you, and you know she's going to one-shot you if she gets close enough. But she's going to get there very slowly, and you're going to watch her as she slowly does that. All in all, though, this is a pretty fun tier. The battleships are fat and slow, but they do pack a big punch if they hit you because there's no real armor at this tier. The cruisers, you have a big variety. You have fast, rapid-firing cruisers with torpedoes, or you have slow cruisers like St. Louis that are just made out of guns. And then destroyer, you have the one destroyer, but it's a pretty powerful destroyer. But it's the only one you will see at tier 3. And that will complete all reviews on tier 3 ships currently. There could be more in the future, but we don't have those, so I can't really compare them if I don't have them. If you liked the video, make sure you like and subscribe. And as mentioned, the update does go up today. It should be completed about 45 minutes ago or so. So I will be looking into that. And hopefully we'll have some more good information for next video. And tomorrow, well, the next video we're going to go over next week is going to be tier 4 destroyers. So there's going to at least be more than one destroyer this week. There's going to be about 4. We're going to have Minakaze, we're going to have Clemson, we're going to have Shenyang, which is the Pan-Asian one. I've renamed that one Kamikaze. And then the first British destroyer we see, which is Valkyrie. So a little bit of a variation there as well. Some good comparisons. So again, thank you for watching. Take care and have a good night.